Take my people with me. Together we are going to a brand new home. Far across the river, can you hear freedom calling? Calling me to answer. Gonna keep on keeping on. I can feel it in my bones.
Hey, good afternoon. I'm Reverend Mark Hughes. I'm with the Vermont Racial Justice Alliance, and welcome to Juxtaposition. We're here again. Happy New Year. It's a great year. We're at the top of the new year. It's definitely cold outside. We got a great program for you today, bringing on some black folks trying to affect change here in the Chittenden County area and across the state. I'm happy to be with you today. Today we're going to talk about something. I was actually listening to the governor's speech, and I was contemplating what we are doing this upcoming year, and we've got a ton of stuff that's happening, and we'll be telling you more about. And one of those things, was about our next steps and what's happening with the Vermont Racial Justice Alliance and the things that we're doing in the activities that we have going on. But the governor caught my attention on his inaugural speech, and he said something. He said, "Consider the data." So I'm going to take that and run with it today. Today I'm joined by my colleagues from the Vermont Racial Justice Alliance. I have with me Mr. Rajni Edens. He is the director of cultural empowerment at the Vermont Racial Justice Alliance. Thank you, Rajni. I'm so happy you're here.
It's good to be here with you.
And I'm also joined by Brother Isaac Owusu, who's also a director here at the Vermont Racial Justice Alliance. He is the director of community engagement and support. Welcome. I'm glad you're here with me, my brother.
Of course, it's a blessing.
It's always a blessing. So yeah, so definitely, a lot of things that are happening, a lot of things that have happened. Sometimes it's good to look back. I got this first graphic up for you right now, and what it's just really about, what is it that we're doing here? Sometimes what we want to do is we want to look back. It's important for us to know where we are, where we're coming from, so we can understand where we are. And once we know where we are, we'll be able to we'll be better and able to determine how to get to where we're going. And I don't know who said that, but I got a pretty good idea. But it's just one of them things that I wanted to just kind of remind folks, because and that next thing, you can go ahead and put that slide up too. That next thing is what we've been talking about, and I told you at the end of last year, we're coming back to it. We're going to be talking a lot about Reconstruction. Thank you for that slide. So I got a quick book here for you before we get started. This is Reconstruction, Eric Foner. If you haven't had the opportunity to check this book out, we're reading this. I'd highly recommend it. It really gets into, how did we recover, or how did we attempt to recover from the Civil War. It gets into the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendment. You remember last year we were all on to abolish slavery. We got that done. We ran some victory laps, but now we're here. We're looking at a bunch of other things. We're also deep in the community doing a lot of things too. But yeah, definitely, again, gentlemen, welcome. It's so good to be hanging out with y'all today. I know one of the things that we've been challenged with in community is there has been some violence on the uprise. There has been some deaths in our community, some homicides in our community. There's conversation about gun violence and so forth. And I see and I understand that it looks like the governor's put together a task force. Now the war is not on drugs, it's on crime. So they switched up on it's a war on crime, and they've got this joint task force. There's federal folks, there's state folks, the folks with the public safety, state police. They're even coordinating across all of the agencies and so forth, and I think the mayor is doing something similar to that. So yeah, I was just wondering, thoughts on that. What is going on, and what kind of solutions are going to get us to where we need to go here? Rajni.
Well, I think it's definitely important to consider that we're in a pandemic, that we have a rise in a number of different social ills, not just here in Burlington and in Vermont, but across the nation. I think that also looking specifically at our own community, being a community that is more visibly adversely affected by different adverse outcomes, we're usually the ones to kind of be the canary in the coal mine, to be a visible representation of that extremity. I do think it's important for people in the mayor's and the chief of police's position to more intentionally go about including a diverse array of people of African descent, to have some more solid representation and input regarding devising solutions in actual collaboration with community, because so much of the history of agencies of police themselves is rooted in systemic racism, having their origin in the paddy rollers of old and in the slave patrols and the returning of enslaved peoples to their captivity.
Yeah, so I mean, definitely systemic racism a thing. There's a slide up for y'all right now, just to remind folks on that. I know we've had a lot of conversations about systemic racism at the statewide level. That's why we created the Office of Racial Equity. That's why we created the Racial Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging Office. That's why we created the joint resolution that racism is a public health emergency. I mean, one of the things they said on that is that the legislative body was committed to a sustained and, quote, a deep work of eradicating systemic racism throughout the state and actively fighting racist practices and participating in the creation of a more just and equitable system. Again, this is a joint resolution by the legislature. Ominous, I haven't seen addressing systemic racism as a major priority of the state legislatively. I've listened to public radio, Vermont Public, and I've seen all of the conversations happening across all of our media outlets, and I've seen the speaker. I've been in the speakers as well as the President Pro Tem's office since this session has started. But ominously, I'm not seeing that as a priority. What we see here from this definition is that racism, that systemic racism, is a political and an economic divide along racial lines. Isaac, I know, if we're fighting an issue in our communities that have to do with a political and economic divide along racial lines, that maybe policing may not necessarily be the solution. What is the solution?
Again, we have these conversations over and over again. It's really looking at our leaders in our communities. You know, what work is being done. How do we try to mitigate these disparities? And again, when we have opposition within, these various organizations or these various leaders in these communities, and then there's another, in addition, there's a divide, it makes that much more harder to resolve. I mean, we have to really look to the community, talk to the community, partner with various community partners and see what is the problem, what do the people want, what the issue is. We can't keep, that white supremacy culture where we let folks tell us how do we resolve what's going on in our communities pertaining to systemic racism. There's far more problems that that these communities face that these legislators and these various folks will not be able to comprehend. But us having the lived experience, we come from it from a different perspective. Not saying we're the knight in shining armor, but we see things from a different perspective. There has to be a change, and it seems like the only resolve is coming from other sources. Is just working groups. Let's do working groups. Let's get the data. It's going to show the same thing. In every report, it's going to show there's disparities and all social determinants of life for Black and brown folks.
So consider the data. So I mean, definitely. Listen to this. This is what I heard. The governor say. He said. Housing, quote. He said the housing burden, income, property value, property levels, labor force, and access to broadband. And he went on to say, it's clear some are consistently doing better than others. I mean, the tale of two worlds, because actually he was talking about the difference between Burlington and cities and towns across the state as opposed to those which are rural, almost completely oblivious to the fact that here within Burlington, that same fact exists with the disparities between black folks and folks that are here in the community. Thoughts on that, Rajni?
Yeah, I think that's kind of a bait and switch approach that some politicians employ, because those metrics can be deceiving.
Yeah.
If it's not actively directed to understanding what the source causes of these disparities are, and it's not actively expressed and explored how we can leverage partnerships with, as Isaac had said, leaders in community who have their boots on the ground, who are already engaged with communities and have relational capacity, then it's not going to be effective. So I think more than ever, if we're going to utilize these glorious funds that the governor is speaking about, the vital utility of us having access to, then we have to be included in the conversation in an effective and integrity-based way that allows us to have input on the outcome.
Them glorious funds, what he said is he said, quote, he said, once in a lifetime opportunity. He said, these are historic, this is historic federal aid and record state surpluses. Now, wait a minute, let me get this right. We've got historic federal aid, we've got record surpluses, and we've already acknowledged as a state that we're dealing with this issue of systemic racism. And we know and understand that the challenge of systemic racism is a political and economic divide along racial lines. But the solution to the challenge is to divert these funds into the rural communities. Now, there's no false narrative of scarcity. What I'm getting at is there's nothing wrong with investing in the rural communities. But it is if you're not talking about investing here in black and brown folks understanding what systemic racism is. Let's take a look at this slide right here. So what we've got, 3 times, black students are 3 times more likely to be suspended. 67%, one study found that 67% of doctors have bias against African-American patients. And the numbers go on and on. I'm gonna ask you to keep that up. This is the median wealth. Median wealth, what we're looking at, and these are numbers that are pre-COVID. This was at the end of 2016, and they have assuredly widened in gap, where you're looking at the median wealth of a black family. Some suggest that it's upwards of 13 times in division of that of a white family. In other words, a white family's median wealth is 13 times that of a black family, and that is pre-COVID. Again, we believe it's widened. You can't fix that in 5 honest, hard-working lifetimes. So what we have to look at, if we're really going to talk about the challenges that we're seeking to address here, and later I'll have some more slides for you, and we'll talk more about what the shifting demographic are in the state of Vermont. And I think we'll find that some of those are pretty appalling. But as far as the work that we're doing here, Isaac, I know your boots on the ground. Some of the challenges that we're dealing with here is some of the challenges that you deal with on a regular basis with our rapid response capability, and some of the challenges that are on your plate and that you're currently addressing. What are you seeing?
I mean, it's an abundant amount of folks just coming in and faced with, various different crises, and listening to the speech, it's almost deja vu, because if you literally replace businesses and towns with people or black and brown folks, that conversation is the same conversation that should be we all should be having nationwide, But when our so-called leaders are fixated, or I guess they care more about the environment than our folks, these problems are going to persist. We're going to have a full list of requests in our communities asking us for assistance with food and again, I just met with a gentleman from the African community who, just told me three of the Somalian community members had to move out because there's a policy in Vermont that states you cannot have more than a certain amount of folks per square footage. And the only option for them is Champlain housing. So, we can solve all these various issues when it comes to, the environment or rural and urban communities. But again, we'll be right back to square one.
So is the whole conversation, is the, not to say it's, because I lived rural for a good time when I first lived here in central Vermont. So it's not like it's a dirty word, but does it feel like a gaslight, Rajni? Does it feel like a bait and switch where the governor is actually pivoting on this thing because maybe he can't get the word systemic racism out of his mouth?
What is misleading? I think that if we're going to be honest with ourselves about really having reverence and respect for the human dignity of all people, then all people should be included in the conversation about having access to human needs. And I think that's fair. Until we are able to wrap our minds around saying those taboo words, systemic racism, in concert with poverty, because the majority of poor people are white, but the majority of black people are poor.
Get that slide back up, please. Yeah, the majority of black people are poor, but the majority of poor people are white. You said it. So if we lift up from the bottom up, then everybody's okay. And that's really what we all want, is we want everybody around us to have everything that they need.
Right.
Right? So, but when we skip over a certain group of folks, thanks for that slide, you skip over a certain group of folks and you say, oh yeah, well we need to pivot out to the rural area, knowing that, because we got to be mindful of, we're in a place right now, folks, where we're talking George Floyd, we're talking pandemic, we're talking where things have been laid bare, we're talking insurrection. Okay, what we're talking about is a nation that is clearly divided, where a major political party, the base of that political party is white nationalism. White nationalism is on the uprise, even in our churches. So, how can we not have a conversation in the state of Vermont about something that's so pervasive and insidious? So, Isaac, the thing that I thought was a serious code switch, was a serious gaslight rather, was when we started talking about root causes. The governor started laying down root causes. He's saying, hey, if we didn't do these expungements, if we weren't using this divisive rhetoric that causes, that discourages public service, in other words, policing, I guess the thing I'm getting at here is all of the tools that have been used by the progressives to try to level the playing field and straighten this mess out are actually being challenged by the administration and others with this rhetoric as if somehow or another they're harmful, but they've actually been defensive in nature and not offensive. But in terms of what's happening in our communities, the conversation begs itself is this whole conversation on policing. So, your thoughts as far as, where this conversation is going and where they're trying to lead us and where we need to go.
Yeah, again, thank you for that. That is the problem that persists, right? We have the people who are in the position of power, who are not really, speaking truth to power. They're not talking about the real issues. For instance, avoiding the topic of systemic racism, that is a root cause in all the issues. If we're not talking about it, how we can dance around the topic. The policing issue, again, we hear, I don't want to call any names, but there's a certain chief of police who...
We'll see him later.
Yeah, there's a certain chief of police, who dances around and, plays the blame game all day instead of actually, trying to get in our communities and do what's right. That's what we'll be faced with time and time again. Again, the reason why slavery is here, we teach this, the economics of slavery. There's a political an economic division along racial lines, and that's going to persist until we start having these conversations, and that's what we've been avoiding time and time again.
Yeah, I'm not going to get too much on policing because that's how they get us, because we get so busy talking about policing that we forget that, look, we need to have an honest conversation about where is my 40 acres and my mule. That's the conversation that we need to be having. I am tired of telling people stop hurting us, stop killing us. We need to start saying where is my stuff. So one of the things that I thought was actually infuriating. I wouldn't say it like that, it's a mind twist is he got to talking about, there's this conversation going on around regulations. They're talking about, we need to lift these policies that restrict the ability to fit the needs of a more diverse and lower income tenant in our communities. We need to empower small groups to stand. We need to ensure that small groups don't have the ability to stand in the way of projects. Well, the reason why they instituted that was to keep people like us out. We're talking about Act 250. Act 250 that was implemented in 1968, 1969, when the rest of the nation was burning down because of the civil rights movement. That was the most important thing that this governor could do in this state. And the reason why I'm going there is that it's ridiculous today to sit here and look at us and say, oh, well, we want to get rid of these because it's economically advantageous to them now. They're starting to see that the cost associated with implementing policy violence is really too high for them to bear now. So now it's time for them to change their policy, not to bring in more black people, but to provide an economic advantage to white people. So Rajni, I think it's fitting for you to maybe tell us a little bit more about some of the things that you're doing in the community. I just want to give you a couple minutes to tell us some of the things, because what we're doing is what we have to do as black folks in this community is yes, we call this out, but at the same time, we're going to take care of ourselves anyway. We're going to continue to do the work in our communities and make a difference in our communities and have a positive impact in our communities because we are powerful. Okay, so I just want to hear a little bit more about some of the things that you've been doing lately, just on some updates.
Oh, definitely. So we've been active in cultivating and curating monthly Black artist showcases, highlighting the narratives of Black people in the area in terms of the need to elevate our own imagery and expression and story in spaces that are so homogenous that we seldom get to see ourselves reflected through our own eyes. So we actually started the first ever Black Unity Summit, known as the Black Experience, this past year.
Nice.
And we're able to garner the presence of the revolutionary, world-renowned icon, Dr. Angela Davis. And we plan to have this as a yearly tradition to unify Black people across the diaspora. Because there's never been an event unifying Black people across the diaspora in the history of Vermont or New England.
Gotcha.
We feel strongly that it's very important to have representation and opportunity to express our conviction and faith and reverence for our people historically, our heritage, our history, our story, our brilliance, our contribution to the human family from foundationally to the present. So we're very excited to be a part of these many different aspects of bringing culture to the environment, of holding space for youth of African descent and global majority to see themselves reflected in holistic, positive ways, and to the to the wider community of European descent and other different ethnicities to have a touchstone to see that beauty and connect to the humanizing and sensitizing inspiration of that creative endeavor as well.
I appreciate that, and the things that have been happening out of the Richard Kemp Center, it was over 2.5 years ago, but it was our vision, because we see that there are a lot of task force and there are a lot of folks saying, oh, we need to do this, and there's a lot of dog whistles that are going off, and there's this old, insidious, this age-old, just dog ugly innuendo that you hear that says, oh, well, we just, we know how to handle this problem. We know how to handle this black problem, like somebody didn't read the Kerner report or something like that, not understanding that what we know how to do best is we know how to take care of ourselves in our communities. So that's why we said, let's divest and reinvest in the Richard Kim Center. There's a job fair going on over there right now. I know that we've had the Black Artist Showcases as well as the Black Artist Markets and other stuff, other activities, many community activities out of there as well. And we're doing a lot of things, community outreach. We're providing grants, we're providing personal assistance and so forth. Isaac, what are some of the things that you're doing briefly?
Thank you. So yeah, you mentioned a few of them. Last year, we rolled out a small business grant for our folk, black and brown folks, black and brown businesses, where we allocated funds to 5 black-owned businesses. We have a rapid response form. We have, query form. We hosted our First Friday, where we gather our black communities every first Friday. On a legislative level, we're pushing our policies. We're tracking a bunch of stuff on our civic engagements.
Yeah.
We're doing a lot, and it's trying to, fill that void and mitigate those disparities. But, the work doesn't stop. We're fighting a system that's been in place for 400 years. So.
Right. Absolutely. The work never stops, and we'll be moving forward on some economic justice policy at the statewide level, as well as equal protection under the law. We'll be doing some of those things as well, another constitutional amendment. So lots of stuff that we have in store. One of the things I'll leave you with, and we're ready to wrap, but I know the governor, he said, we need more people. He said more workers, more homeowners, more students, more volunteers and communities and customers, and he says taxpayers. And I'm looking at the numbers just for Chittenden County. In Chittenden County, if you look at the black population in your lower middle right, there you see that the black population increased by 47.9% here in the county. So thank you for that slide. We'll move it on. And I've got some other data to share with you. We'll talk more about it next time. But what we've got to understand is if we're seeking to entice folks to come into this state, we've got to understand that, nearly probably 90 to 95% of this state is white. There's only about 68% of America that's white. So when you do the math, and what we started with is this: consider the data. When you do the math, the only way you're going to get people to come here and stay, and I remember Phil said, we want a lot of people to come here, and he said, and he stressed, we want some to stay. So the question is which some are you talking about? If you want people to come here and stay, then you got to create a fabric within our society where black folks' needs are taken care of, where systemic racism is considered. So I'm thanking everybody for joining us tonight. It's been great. Rajni, thank you so much for joining. It's good to have you with me. Isaac, of course. We're getting ready to go over and see John Murad over at the community thing. So this will be a great experience as well. Thank you for coming. You've been watching Juxtaposition. I'm Reverend Mark Hughes. This is it. It is our duty to fight for our freedom. It's our duty to win. We must love and care for one another. We have nothing to lose but our chains. Good evening.